The rain poured heavily over the small village of Eldermore, as dark clouds gathered above the centuries-old St. Augustine's church. Bells tolled, echoing mournfully across the valley. Inside, the air was thick, a suffocating blend of incense, rain-soaked coats, and unspoken fear. At the front of the church, Emma, a young widow with hollow eyes and trembling hands, stood beside a polished oak coffin. Her 2-year-old daughter, Lila, clung to her dress, staring blankly at the crowd. Everyone had gathered to mourn Daniel Whitmore, a man in his prime, healthy, loved by all, now lying cold and still, his sudden death a mystery. But just as the priest began the final prayer, Lila's tiny voice rang out, cutting through the silence like a knife. "Mama, Papa's stuck. He's calling me. He's asking for help." Gasps rippled through the congregation. People exchanged uneasy glances, their murmurs filling the church like the rustling of leaves before a storm. Emma froze, her grip on Lila tightening, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. "What did you say, sweetheart?" she whispered, kneeling to her daughter's eye level. But Lila pointed directly at the coffin. Her voice was stronger now, insistent, fearful. "He says he can't breathe. He's in there. He's calling me, Mama." A cold shiver ran down every spine in that church. As the funeral ended, and people shuffled out in hushed terror, Victor, Daniel's cousin, approached Emma. His sharp eyes were filled with something she couldn't quite place. Greed, perhaps? His smile was thin like a blade. "Emma," he said smoothly, "I know this is a difficult time, but Daniel owed a great deal of money. Debts that don't disappear with death." Emma's brows furrowed. "Debts?" Daniel never mentioned debts. Victor's expression hardened. "They were real, and unless you sell the house, you'll be drowning in them." His tone left no room for doubt, but something inside Emma whispered, "He's lying." And as he walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's death was more than it seemed. That night, as wind howled through the trees and rain lashed the windows of Emma's small cottage, Lila woke screaming. Emma rushed to her side. "What's wrong, baby?" Lila's face was pale, eyes wide with terror. "Papa's crying, Mama. He's cold and scared. Why won't you help him?" Emma held her close, her own tears falling. But as she soothed her daughter, a soft sound stopped her cold. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. From outside? No. From beneath the floorboards. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She waited, frozen, straining to hear. Nothing. Just the wind. But her heart wouldn't stop racing. The next morning, as Emma walked through the muddy streets of Eldermore, she was approached by Thomas, Daniel's closest friend. "Emma, I need to speak with you," Thomas said quietly, glancing around as if someone might be listening. Before Daniel died, Victor was pressing him hard to sell the house. Daniel was scared. "He told me if anything happened to him, I should watch over you." Emma's heart pounded. But why? What was Victor after? Thomas hesitated. Daniel never said exactly, but he was frightened. And now? He glanced in the direction of the church, where Daniel's coffin still lay in the crypt, awaiting burial. "Now he's dead," Emma finished for him, her voice hollow, but her mind was racing. Was Daniel really dead? The following evening, as the church stood silent in the darkness, Emma found herself drawn there, Thomas at her side. They crept inside, Lila clutched in Emma's arms, refusing to let go of her mother. And then, as if the shadows themselves were speaking, a sound. Knocking. Faint, weak, but unmistakable. Emma gasped, Thomas frozen beside her. The knock came again, followed by something that chilled them to their bones. A muffled voice. A man's voice. Daniel's voice. "Help me. Please. Someone. Help." Emma screamed for the priest, for anyone, as Thomas banged on the coffin, calling Daniel's name. Within minutes, a small group of villagers gathered, their faces pale as death. Victor arrived last, his face twisted in anger and something darker. Fear. "What are you doing?" he barked, trying to push his way between them. "You can't open that. You'll disturb the dead." But Thomas stood firm. "No, Victor. We're opening it. Now." With shaking hands, they pried the lid off the coffin. And there, inside, was Daniel. Alive but deathly pale, gasping for breath, eyes wide with terror. His lips were cracked, and his hands were bruised from pounding on the inside of the coffin. Gasps and screams filled the church. Emma fell to her knees, sobbing, as Daniel reached weakly for her. He did this, Victor. He drugged me. Daniel rasped, voice breaking. Wanted me gone. Wanted the house. The villagers turned on Victor, whose face had gone ashen. He stumbled back, trying to escape, but strong hands grabbed him, forcing him down. You tried to bury him alive for money, Thomas spat. You monster. Victor was arrested that night, charged with attempted murder, fraud, and forgery. His carefully laid plan had unraveled, thanks to a child's innocent voice and a father's desperate will to live. Daniel was rushed to the hospital, where doctors called his survival nothing short of a miracle. Emma never left his side, and Lila, finally able to hug her father, whispered, I told you he was calling Mama. Months later, Daniel and Emma sat together on the porch of their home, watching Lila play in the garden. The sun was warm, birds sang. Life had returned. But the shadow of those days never fully left them. Sometimes, when the night grew dark and the wind howled just right, Emma would think she heard the faintest echo of knocking, a reminder of how close death had come. Yet above all, she was grateful, for her husband, for her daughter, and for the strength that had seen them through. Because in Elder Moor, people would speak of the man who escaped his own grave, and the wife who never stopped believing for years to come. Weeks passed, and while Daniel was slowly recovering, something strange lingered in the house. First, it was small things. Emma would wake in the middle of the night to find Lila standing by the window, staring into the woods. Lila, what are you doing? Her daughter would reply in a whisper. Papa says not to go to the woods. He says the bad man is still watching. Emma's skin prickled. She would turn on all the lights, but outside, there was nothing. Or so she told herself. But deep down, Emma knew. Victor might have been arrested, but someone else was out there, watching, waiting. One morning, Thomas came rushing to their home, pale as a sheet. Emma! Daniel, you need to hear this, he gasped, locking the door behind him. What's wrong? Daniel asked, weak but alert. Thomas swallowed. I went to visit Victor in prison. I needed to hear from him why he did it. And Emma, Daniel? He wasn't working alone. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. What are you talking about? Thomas leaned in. There's someone else. Victor said he was forced to go through with the plan, that he owed money to someone dangerous. A man from the city. Someone who wanted your house, Daniel. And if Victor failed, they said they'd come for him, and for you. The room fell into a heavy silence. Lila clutched her doll tightly, her eyes wide. Daniel struggled to sit upright. Who is this man? What does he want with us? Thomas shook his head. I don't know. But last night, I saw someone in the woods behind your house, watching, and it wasn't Victor. That night, as the moon hung low and red in the sky, the knocking began again. But this time it wasn't from inside a coffin. It was coming from beneath the floorboards. Emma and Daniel stood frozen in the living room as the slow, deliberate knocking echoed up from below. It's impossible, Daniel whispered. The cellar was sealed years ago. Emma's voice trembled. Who's down there? Suddenly, Lila pointed to the floor. Papa says he's back. The bad man. He's under the house. The next day, as the sun rose weakly over Elder Moor, Daniel and Thomas pried open the entrance to the old cellar. Dust swirled like spirits in the light as they descended the creaking wooden stairs. At first, nothing but shadows and cobwebs. But then Daniel stopped dead in his tracks. On the far wall, fresh scratch marks. Long, deep, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. And carved into the stone, a message. I know what you did. Returning to the house, Emma tried to calm Lila, but her daughter kept whispering, He's coming, Mama. The man with the red eyes. Daniel sat heavily in his chair. There's something I never told you, Emma. She turned, heart pounding. What? Daniel looked haunted. Years ago, before we were married, I borrowed money from a man in the city. His name was Marcus Hale. Ruthless. People say he runs everything from the shadows. I paid him back. At least, I thought I did. Thomas paled. What if Victor got tangled up with Marcus? What if that's who's really after you? That night, as the village slept, a fire broke out. Not in their home, but in Thomas's workshop. Flames swallowed everything. People rushed to help, but a message was left behind in the ash, painted on the ground with something dark and sticky. Leave the house or next time. It's you. The villagers were terrified. No one would speak of it openly, but Emma knew. He's warning us, she whispered to Daniel. Marcus Hale. He wants our home. But why? Driven to desperation, Emma searched through old papers and town records. What she found shattered everything she believed about their home. Decades ago, the house had belonged to a man named Edgar Hale, Marcus's grandfather. A man who was said to have hidden something of enormous value within its walls before he mysteriously vanished. Gold? Jewels? Secrets? No one knew for sure, but Marcus Hale had been searching for it for years. And now he believed Daniel had found it. Days later, as storm clouds gathered once again over Eldermore, Emma looked out the window and saw two black cars pull up near their house. Men in dark coats stepped out, and at their center, a tall man with piercing, cold eyes. Marcus Hale himself. Daniel stood weakly but defiantly at the door as the man approached. Mr. Whitmore, Marcus said smoothly. We have unfinished business. Daniel glared. I owe you nothing. Marcus smiled thinly. We'll see. I will have what's mine. You can give it willingly, or not. Emma stepped forward, her voice firm. You'll get nothing from us. But Marcus only laughed, turning away. We'll see who wins this game. Later that night, as the storm raged, Emma searched the cellar again. And behind a false wall, she found a hidden room. Inside, a locked iron chest. Opening it revealed old documents, deeds, and strange artifacts. Things that could destroy Marcus Hale if exposed. Proof of crimes, bribes, and dark dealings going back generations. But just as she turned to tell Daniel, the door to the cellar slammed shut. And from the darkness, a voice whispered, I told you, this isn't over. The door to the cellar was sealed shut, trapping Emma inside the cold darkness. Her breath came in quick gasps as she turned and stared at the ancient iron chest still open behind her. The secrets inside could ruin Marcus Hale forever. But now, he knew she had found them. From above, she could hear heavy footsteps, pacing, voices murmuring. Men in her house. Marcus's men. Emma backed against the wall, clutching a rusted lantern, her mind racing. Think, Emma. Think. Suddenly, from somewhere above, Lila's terrified scream cut through the night like a knife. Mama! Mama! Emma's heart nearly stopped. Her daughter was in danger. Upstairs, Daniel struggled to his feet, leaning on a cane, his face pale but his eyes burning with resolve. As Marcus and his men tore the house apart, searching for what they believed was their inheritance, Daniel stepped into the room. Get out of my house, he said, his voice hoarse but filled with steel. Marcus turned, amused. You should be resting, Daniel. You're not in any shape to fight me. Daniel smirked. Maybe not, but let's see how much damage I can do before I go down. Without warning, Daniel swung his cane, smashing it into one thug's head, sending him crashing to the floor. Marcus stepped back in shock, but Daniel wasn't done. Rage and love for his family giving him strength he didn't know he had. Back in the cellar, Emma ran her hands desperately over the stone walls, searching for anything. A way out, a secret door, and then her fingers found something. A loose stone. She yanked it free, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed the documents from the chest, stuffed them into her coat, and plunged into the passageway. As she crawled through the dirt and darkness, she whispered to herself, Hold on, Lila. Mama's coming. Moments later, Emma burst out from behind a bookshelf in the study, directly behind Marcus's men. She didn't hesitate. Grabbing a heavy bookend, she smashed it into the nearest thug's skull. He went down hard. Emma! Daniel shouted in surprise, blood on his face but still standing. Where's Lila? Emma cried, panic in her voice. Marcus smiled cruelly, pulling a small knife from his coat. Safe for now. Give me the documents, and maybe I'll let her live. Emma's heart thundered. But then she saw Lila, standing on the stairs, clutching her doll, wide-eyed but unharmed. Daniel saw her too and knew what they had to do. You want your secrets, Marcus? Here's what I think of them. Emma pulled out the documents and threw them into the fireplace. Flames roared as years of Hale family corruption turned to ash. Marcus lunged toward the fire, screaming, "No!" But Daniel was faster. He tackled Marcus, slamming him to the ground. The two men struggled, fists flying, as Emma grabbed Lila and backed away. Run, Emma! Daniel shouted. But she didn't run. She grabbed a heavy candlestick and with a fierce cry, brought it down hard on Marcus's head. By the time the police arrived, summoned by Thomas, who had escaped the burning workshop and realized what was happening. Marcus lay unconscious, his men subdued or fled. The officers quickly pieced together what had happened. The remains of the documents, the testimony of Daniel, Emma, Thomas, and the villagers, and the evidence hidden in the cellar were enough to bring Marcus Hale down for good. He was arrested, charged not only with attempted murder but also conspiracy, extortion, and more crimes than anyone could count. The legend of the mighty Marcus Hale crumbled overnight. Weeks later, as spring finally warmed Eldermore, Emma, Daniel, and Lila sat in their garden, watching flowers bloom in the sunlight, a sharp contrast to the dark days they had survived. Daniel, though still healing, looked stronger, his arm around Emma. Lila giggled as she chased butterflies, her laughter filling the air that once held only fear. Thomas visited often, helping Daniel repair the damage done to their home. And though they knew they could never forget what happened, they were free. Yet, on some nights, when the wind howled just right, Emma swore she could still hear something. A faint knocking, somewhere deep beneath the earth. And when she asked Lila about it, her daughter would smile softly and say, "It's okay, Mama. Papa says the bad men are gone." But sometimes, he still hears them trying to get out. In a town like Eldermore, where the past never truly sleeps and every stone has a story, some secrets refuse to stay buried. But love, courage, and truth are stronger than the darkest evil. And for Daniel, Emma, and little Lila, life began again. Forever changed, but together. Because sometimes the dead don't stay silent. And sometimes, it's those left behind who must fight the hardest to be heard.